Hey, what is up mortals? It is Bubbly Nami here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 4 of What If Izuku Had a Wood Release Quirk. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying sit back and relax, you're in for a treat. And so, we begin. The three students found themselves surrounded by villains with nowhere to go. We have no choice. We have to fight them off. Momo spoke to her classmates, already creating a bow staff for her to use. Here, take these as a precaution. The girl made 2 more weapons for Jiro and Midoriya to use. They stood in a formation that allowed them to cover each other's blind spots, as they waited for the felons to make their move. One of the criminals recklessly charged at them, starting to fight. Kyoko easily blasted the villains away with her quirk, stunning some of the villains behind him. Another ran up to Izuku to receive a wooden beam to the face as Izuku used his quirk on his gauntlets. He created a sharper trunk with the other gauntlet to pierce through the hard ground of the mountain region and get to softer soil. He filtered some of the water from his packs into the ground so he could call forth the trees faster. The criminals kept coming, attacking from all sides and barely being beaten back. It was a losing battle. Even with the extra weapons and tools Momo provided, the freckled male grew frustrated, wishing that he could do more to help end this fight. Another of their foes managed to sneak up while Jiro was distracted, scoring a hit on her leg. The girl cried out and barely managed to block a blow coming from the other criminal she was fighting. The process repeated with Yaoyorozu. This time, the group slowly began overwhelmed by the sheer amount of opponents being thrown at them. Izuku had a feeling of helplessness deep in his chest, a feeling he never wished to feel again, not after what Katsuki said. He had proven the Ashen Blonde wrong. Midoriya wasn't helpless or useless. He had a strong and unique quirk, one that was going to get them out of there. The jungle hair teen yelled as he plunged his hands deep into the earth, calling forth his quirk. He fed chunks of his energy into drawing several wooden beams from the earth. What the adolescent didn't expect was the ground to rupture as a forest of trunks propelled from the ground, clubbing 1/4 of the villains around them. In the heat of the moment, the Viridian Eye teen went with it. He controlled the beams with laser focus, entrapping and knocking out as many villains as he could, with the tides being turned. Momo and Kyoko joined their classmate in beating down all the villains they had been struggling to fight for so long. After a few minutes, the trio was victorious. Against all odds, they had destroyed the wave of felons that had been pitted against them. Jiro let out a pained grunt as the adrenaline began fleeing from her system. The wound in her leg caused by one of the criminals beginning to ail her. Yaoyorozu was quick to act, creating bandages and rubbing alcohol to clean and bandage the wound. Izuku slumped against one of the quirk-created trees. Leaning against the solid trunk, he closed his eyes for a second, feeling just how much energy he expelled finally hitting him. He opened them and his body tensed as he saw one last villain surface from the earth. Ready to grab Momo, the boy let out a cry of warning to the tall girl as he flung out an arm. One of the nearby pillars of wood responded, whipping around and slamming directly into the man's face, knocking him out instantly. A breath of relief came from the freckled teenager. He shakily stood up, heading over to the 2 girls as Kyoka's wound was finally finished being wrapped up. The triad of UA students began to plan out what they could possibly do in this situation. Communications were likely still jammed, and all of their other classmates were likely in their own mess. The most logical course of action would be to try and escape, Yao Momo sighed, as she ran her hand through her hair. But that mist villain is still a huge problem. Yeah, as long as he's around, he'll just teleport us somewhere else, possibly with more villains. Jiro pointed at the current state of them. And we won't be able to face a whole new group of villains as we are. I'm injured, and we can see you're tired, Midoriya. That may be. But what other choice do we have? We can't just sit around here doing nothing. He steels himself and turns to see the fountain, where the villains had appeared. In the distance, our best chance is to head towards the entrance, regardless of who might be waiting there, and escape. If we can get out, we can call for help. We should do our best to avoid the fountain, though. The two young women nodded in agreement, already knowing that the area was likely still crawling with villains. Not to mention, there was still that horrendous-looking beast that they saw emerging from the shadowy rift. Momo and Izuku bent down to help their injured ally up, the taller girl holding on to one of her arms to help carry her weight. I've got her. You should keep yourself free. You're the most powerful one out of the three of us. It's best that you lead the way and stay unburdened. The freckled boy gave an affirmative nod as they set off to their destination. The air was extremely tense as the trio made their way to the exit, every sound setting them off. They desperately hoped that they wouldn't encounter any more enemies, not in their current state. They had only encountered a lone villain, who they managed to knock out quickly and quietly. After several more minutes of anxious traveling, they saw the fountain area, and their homeroom teacher's head being repeatedly slammed into the ground by the monster they had seen before. Yaoyorozu covered her mouth and looked away, feeling a wave of nausea hit her as the sickening cracks echoed across the building. The scraggly-looking villain called for the thing, Nomu, to stop its attack. The freak of nature dropped the man carelessly. The psychotic man seemed to lecture on his disappointment about All Might not being here, and that perhaps he could come out if we were to kill one of his students. The trio tensed up immediately and dropped into a battle stance, only to be surprised as the man dashed to the edge of the area. Overlooking the shipwreck zone, horror filled them as they realized that Tsuyu, Denki, and Mineta were all in the water, the girl being the target of the hand-covered psycho. Panic, anger, and adrenaline filled Izuku as one finger closed in on Asui's face. Time seemed to slow down as one of them made contact. Energy flowed through him and he slammed his hand into the ground as the second and third made contact. Rumbling came from below as the fourth touched the teen's cheek. No! A flurry of razor-sharp stakes burst from the ground, heading straight for the man. He called out for Nomu, the two switching spots in an instant. And in that instant, the monstrous beast was impaled in several different spots, some lethal to a normal person. Tomura gaped as he saw what looked like tree piercing straight through the League's creations. The attacks didn't stop there. The sheer amount of rage Midoriya felt fed through the ground spikes along the trunks, including the parts within the thing's body. Inhumane screeches were released as it violently struggled. Splintering some of the freakishly strong wood, the spikes grew as the panic of the creature did. Its monstrous cries of panic rose to the crescendo, only to fade into nothing, as a spike emerged from the head of the Nomu, the entire body going limp. Everything was silent, until a gag echoed throughout the building as the gravity of the attack hit Izuku like a truck. Shigaraki screamed out in grief at the ruined monster, turning to the direction the cry came from. You killed my Nomu. The man began wildly scratching his neck. This is impossible. A puny twerp shouldn't have been able to kill it. Kurogiri, they all cheated. The sixth student watched as what they assumed was a mastermind behind the plan broke down as he tore at his neck. The golden-eyed villain materialized, his eyes widening at the sight of the beast skewered and impaled by the wooden stakes. He immediately grabbed the other villain. We must leave now, Shigaraki. Without the Nomu, we have no weapon against All Might. A rift opened for both of them to leave, the man ushering the panicking psycho into it. We have no choice but to retreat and fight another day. Damn you all! You cheaters! I'll kill all of you next time! You're all dead! 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 The hysterical cries of the madmen were abruptly cut off as the portal closed behind them. As the sound of silence engulfed the USJ once more, Izuku passed out. The next thing he knew, the teenager woke up to see the blue sky greeting him. He heard yelling from the sound of people running over to him. He weakly pulled himself up, feeling utterly drained. He glanced around, seeing himself surrounded by paramedics. the USJ facility right next to him. They asked him questions about how he could come to be in such a fatigued state, reminding him of what he had done. He felt the breath being stolen from his lungs as he remembered the mutilated body of the Nomu. He had killed someone. He desperately gasped for air, the words hyperventilating and shock reaching his ear. He felt a shake from his right, seeing a patched up Momo and Kyoko. Their voices were muffled and distorted. Zuku. Down. Izuku. Calm down. We're here for you. Suddenly, the blurring around him snapped back into focus as he stared at Jiro. We've got you. It's not your fault. You were just trying to save Sue. The dam holding back everything burst, and he began to sob, copious amounts of tears flowing from his eyes. The two girls hugged him as he cried with abandon, the trauma of the event hitting him hard. They had no time to process all of the things coming at them at once. It all collected up to a singular moment. When the dam finally burst, the paramedics kept an eye on them, but left them alone to comfort each other. They moved to tend to the last of the students and load up their injured teachers. The bus ride back to UA campus was silent, other than the quiet sniffles of Izuku. They had no words to explain what had happened to the USJ, nor did they want to find any. They all went to the changing rooms, changing out of whatever they had worn during the training gone wrong. Midoriya was brought to Recovery Girl by the two girls, who had comforted him. The elderly hero joined by All Might, and a man who introduced himself as Detective Naomasa. He explained that he had to question them about what happened to the Nomu, the school nurse cutting in and reminding them to stop immediately if he showed any signs of another panic attack. The leader, he was going to attack Asui. I couldn't let him. I felt anger at the thought of someone hurting my classmate, and I used my quirk to try and stop him. The detective motioned for him to carry on, still under the scrutinizing glare of Recovery Girl. The Nomu swapped places with him in a flash, and the beams burst out on the ground, and they... He began to choke up, and the short old nurse immediately stood up.
That is more than enough, Detective Naomasa. This interrogation is through.
The woman went over and patted the teary-eyed boy's hand, turning with a glare at the investigator.
I told you that you should have waited. This was a traumatic event, and they all need time to process.
She ushered them gently from her office, insisting they head home immediately. As soon as he crossed the threshold of his home, he was engulfed in a war hug. Once more, the teenager broke down, clutching tightly to his mother as a lifeline. He cried and sobbed until his tears ran dry, and he was exhausted. Inko led her son to his bed, where she gently took him in and sang. It was an old lullaby that she sang to him as a child. The melody carried away his troubles as he closed his eyes and fell asleep. For once, during this horrible day, Izuku Midoriya finally felt peace. Thank you all so much for sticking around, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Man, what a tearjerker. Before you leave though, we would like to let you know that we, the Celestials, have many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you'll need is right below here in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects our team makes. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I'd like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye, and as always guys, have a divine day.